Thanks so much, Andreas. I hope everyone can hear me okay. And I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here and to thank Andreas and Christoph and the whole team at Fields for making this visit possible. Normally, I love to go in person to Fields. I find the atmosphere very exciting because it's a mix of people that are interested in using mathematics for all kinds of fantastic purposes. Today, I'm going to talk about digital currencies, and in particular, I'm going to focus, as Andreas mentioned, on the role of central bank digital currencies. And I want to highlight today the very difficult position that central banks are in as they make a decision about whether to go for it or not, meaning whether to introduce a central bank digital currency or to continue trying to improve the payment system that we have today, which is based on banks largely. And most of you are making payments, whether you're a wholesale user of finance or somebody buying a loaf of bread at the bakery. You're probably using almost 99.99% of you, 99% of the time are using banks eventually to make your payments. And I'm going to talk about that revolution that we're going through right now. Andreas didn't lay down any ground rules. I think there are a few of us enough here that if you want to interrupt and ask a clarifying question, it's fine with me if it's okay with Andreas. And then at the end, I'm hoping we'll have a lengthy period for discussing the issues in more depth. So let me just share screen and launch into what I want to say in more detail. You all should be seeing my screen now.
Yes.
And this is the problem that we're talking about today. Alice needs to pay $8 to Bob the baker for a loaf of bread. For some reason in the payment technology white papers, it's always Alice and Bob. I'm not sure exactly why it's Alice and Bob, but I guess we're going to work with that today. And the question is, how is Alice going to pay Bob? How is it done today, and how is it going to be done in the coming years? And the coming years are coming in pretty quickly now in terms of change. And one of the reasons that Sweden is looking at a change from paper money to a central bank digital currency, that is electronic money issued by the central bank, is that Swedes are almost not using paper money at all anymore. And this number continues to go down. The last time I visited Stockholm, the fraction of places I could cash in my paper notes was vanishingly small. I tried to pay my hotel bill with paper money and they wouldn't accept it. So basically in Sweden, forget about it. And the central bank doesn't want to get left out of the electronic payment revolution. They don't want an economy in which they play no role in supplying a reliable currency. But they don't want to leave it entirely to the private sector with good reason. As I said, in essentially every use case in the world today, if you're making a payment, it's made either with paper money or most commonly through banks. And I'm sure that you've swiped a credit card or a debit card or tapped your phone or clicked something. And when you did that, you essentially sent a message to your bank to send $8 somehow through a complicated system of payment rails to Bob's bank. Bob gets the message that you've actually credited his account or that the money will be coming eventually. And then he gives you the loaf of bread. That's basically how the transaction occurs. And of course, the advantage of electronic payment is that you don't need to be standing in front of Bob to do it. The question is this an efficient way to run the payment system? And it's actually not clear yet whether this will be the chosen system for the next generation. And I'm going to explain that tension over that decision in the next 20 or 25 minutes, and then we're going to have a discussion. As I said, banks do it all, and they're the backbone of the payment rails. So if Alice is a customer of a bank, then Alice's payment goes through the bank payment rails, most often through the central bank, eventually to Bob's bank, and it comes out at the other end. But it is very complicated. And this arrangement that you see in the schematic diagram has existed essentially since the time of the Middle Ages, or even before, you know, when the Medici in Florence were forwarding payments from local merchants in Italy to merchants in Rotterdam. They would use bank-based payment systems. In those days, it was slow. Today, it's actually not as fast as you might think to do these bank-based payments. Typically, before Bob the Baker gets his money, it's going to be as long as 2 days, which is kind of strange that we're in the 21st century and it takes a couple of days to get the money. Of course, you get your bread right away because Bob gets a message that he's gotten a credit for the money. I'm not going to review this slide in detail, but in the guts or in the payment rails themselves, there is a complicated system of cryptographic verification that Alice's payment token on her credit card or from her phone is good. That information eventually goes to the credit card company, which sends an encrypted payment authorization notice to Alice's bank, which then sends the money back through to the merchant acquirer through another complicated system of payment rails that I'm not going to talk about today. I don't want to explain this diagram today because I just want to lend you the impression that this is probably not going to persist. There's going to be something a lot simpler in the future. This is very expensive to run, and all of the financial firms and technology firms along these payment rails are incurring costs, and they're also taking profits. Economists call those profits rents. So there's rent taking along the payment rails, which makes this a pretty expensive process. Now, when Alice goes into the baker, or when you've bought your coffee at Starbucks, or I guess in Toronto, it's what, Caribou, or one of your favorite coffee vendors, you don't actually notice how expensive it is because the coffee says $5 and you just pay $5 plus tax. But the cost of the coffee that you're buying reflects all of the costs of the payment rails, and I want to talk about that. This is from McKinsey data. The stack of revenues to payment service providers on the left in North America, which is $515 billion a year, and on the right in the rest of the world, another $1.4 trillion. And the stack is broken up according to what payment service is provided. That's color coded. I'm obviously not going to have time to go through all of the color stripes, but if you just stand back and look at this diagram, you'll notice that it's a little bit lopsided with respect to North America versus the rest of the world. There's a division line through the middle where it goes from consumer to commercial. A lot more payment revenues proportionately are consumer payment revenues, meaning the consumers are paying a lot in North America relative to the rest of the world. And if you look at the totals and then divide by GDP, you'll also see that the United States, or North America, is extremely expensive relative to the rest of the world. So there's a subtitle on this slide that says the ratio of profitable franchises that they have, either whether they exist or the degree of profitability. So, and yes, I have read some memos or blog posts from let's say, consortia that suggest that we don't really need to have a CBDC. In fact, there was some pushback from the banking lobby in the United States against the Federal Reserve System's fast payment system called FedNow. And they wrote a very sharply worded letter to the two senators on banking that run the Senate Banking and Finance Committee, asking why would the Fed be doing something like a fast payment system when the banks already are doing it themselves. So I am not at all surprised that banks were not delighted by CBDCs. That's a pretty straightforward answer. It's on a recording.
Yeah, let me call my lawyer in Washington now that I got the inside info. Next one by Cosmin. Do you see a future where individuals could replace current bank accounts with a direct account at the central bank? So basically the central bank now, it's not even a narrow bank anymore. or whatever that is, but it's like an actual, dipping into the private banks, essentially food.
Yeah. So Cosmin, what you just described is literally a form of CBDC. And I don't anticipate this happening in any major country soon. But smaller countries might do this. It's an extreme it places an extreme burden on the central bank to maintain those records with security, to protect against anti-money laundering, to protect against money laundering, to protect against the financing of terrorism, to ensure that transactions are meeting tax compliance and many other matters. And also you're responsible for securing the data with respect to privacy. And if I were running a large central bank, I wouldn't want to have that responsibility unless it was absolutely necessary. But some central banks may actually do that. The Riksbank is considering that. The Central Bank of China, the People's Bank of China, is going to have access to all of those data, but I don't think they're going to be recording the transactions on their own books. Probably the transactions will be recorded or at least made possible by private and state-owned payment service providers like banks and WeChat Pay and Alipay. So there's going to be a spectrum of solutions, but I don't think it's going to be often the case that you simply have your account directly at the central bank and you move your money on the central bank account.
Okay, so Shashank, again, this is the holy grail of all the questions. And remember, you're talking to the Toronto cartel where Ethereum came from. Is there a possibility that a public blockchain token will take over fiat at any point? And let me add to that. When Satoshi Nakamoto released Bitcoin on January of 2009, I think it was the day that Obama released the second big bailout, right? And he wrote on that blog, it's inscribed on the Genesis block of the Bitcoin chain, that on that day, I don't remember the exact phrasing, at that day, the big banks released all these billions of dollars, right? Let's not go into a political conversation, but the holy grail is that at some point, people might say, I don't trust my currency, whether this is the US, Canadian dollar, Australian dollar, my pound, my euro, or whatever that is, or my renminbi, whatever that is. And we create a community that Bitcoin, as it has already been done, attains a value, right? And this becomes now, of course, there's a lot of technical issues. Let's not go there. So do you foresee, and I'm not speaking about a year from now or 5 years from now, a possibility that in the future, like a public blockchain, and the coin that is, it will reach a point, just like gold. Gold is not matched by nobody, it's made by nature. Today we have Bitcoin, that some people call it digital gold, right? Replacing fiat at any point. It's a more philosophical question rather than, but you can speak for hours, of course, but if you were to contain your answer, what would that be?
Well, for me, it's not a philosophical question, it's a practical question. As long as there are sovereign nations, they will have the upper hand. So any country, Canada, the US, any other country, will be able to prevent the entry of a blockchain, let's say, or a non-blockchain foreign currency from being used heavily in their payment system if they get started early enough. The government has the upper hand. The government has the ability to sanction anyone inside the country from using an undesired currency. So whether it's the Securities and Exchange Commission banning transactions based on a foreign currency, or whether it's the Fed banning transactions based on a foreign currency, or the Treasury Department banning transactions based on a foreign currency or some other currency, it's not as though they don't have the upper hand in terms of regulation and use of the court system. So sovereigns will always dominate that decision. And at least in any major country that has control over its own borders, it's not thinkable. Maybe in a very small country that doesn't have a strong sovereign government, or maybe in a post-apocalyptic world in which sovereign governments no longer exist, then yeah, possibly.
Okay, so now, forgive me. I mean, you make me a little bit, again, candid over here. So what I hear is that essentially, if I am to put in layman's words, is that, if we're moving towards this direction, then, whether I'm holding heroin in my home or Bitcoin, there gotta be very similar actions, right?
Yeah, so if you want to send Bitcoin to a friend in China, whether for legal or illegal purposes, or a friend in Afghanistan, or even a friend in France or Germany or Japan, you'll always be able to do that because it's a permissionless system, and nobody's going to, at least in Canada or the US, no one's going to come into your home and steal all your computer technology. But if you want to get on Amazon and order a book, or if you want to make a bank deposit, or if you want to make your car payments or home payments, or if you want to buy Canada government bonds, whatever you want to do, and anything that's recorded as a transaction on the books of a compliant business in your country or government agency, you're subject to the rules of the road in that country. And if they say, I'm sorry, we can't take Bitcoin because it's against the law, you're not going to be able to do it. I mean, maybe on the black market, but it's not going to be legal, and it's maybe it will only exist on the fringe, but it won't be a mainstream activity.
Okay, I see what you say. It's not as devious as I imagine it originally, but I remember back in the days. Are you familiar with this paper, The Moral Character of Cryptographic Work by Philip Rogoway?
No.
Okay, I'll send to you. It's a wonderful paper. But we keep the discussion offline, but I see where this is going. So, Henry. So, Henry Kim, do you foresee not strictly monetary uses of CBDC? For instance, and we're coming to the last question, most likely. For instance, putting constraints on how welfare money is to be spent, or as an efficient means of distributing carbon credits. Do you foresee CBDCs like dipping into that? So let me expand a little bit on what Henry says. More recently, it was like $3 trillion that were released just in March in the United States. This money was supposed to go help the public through the pandemic and steer the economy. Some banks were not even giving the money, the $1,200 checks to the people because they had debt with that bank, right? So a lot of this money didn't even go to the average Joe, but it stayed into the banking system. So it did not essentially help the economy. That's the claim. So do you foresee CBDCs also providing better means of monetary transmission for monetary policy from the countries?
Maybe I misunderstood. I thought Henry's question was, are there uses for CBDC technology other than for monetary applications?
Yeah, like welfare money or to be spent.
Sure.
Carbon credits. Yeah,
there's going to be lots of potential applications. I mean, welfare payments, that's money. So that's a money-like application. But let's suppose someone develops a technology and then Air Canada decides that it wants to convert its mileage point system to a fungible currency. It could simply say to the technology developer, could we use that technology and start tokenizing Air Canada miles? And yeah, you could use it for that, or you could use it for carbon credits, or you could use it for commoditized copper or steel or aluminum. So once you have a very strong CBDC technology, it can be used for transferring units of many other things than money. So absolutely, there are lots of applications.
Thank you. And Cheng make a point. Somebody has to help me decipher his question. Maybe you understand, but because I'm trying to synchronize a lot of things over here. The first advantage you mentioned is efficiency. Are those successful crypto payments sufficiently efficient now, for example, in the UK, Singapore, and China? The context or?
Yeah, so, well, WeChat Pay and Alipay, I don't know if I would call those crypto payments. I mean, anything that's secure is crypto. So yeah, if you call those crypto payments, they're extremely successful. The penetration of WeChat Pay and Alipay individually is in the hundreds of millions of individuals, most of whom have both apps on their phone and use them both on a daily basis. And they're extremely efficient, they're quick, easy to use, and universally accepted. The network externalities are amazing. I know that it's enough to have WeChat Pay and Alipay on my mobile phone because I know every single vendor and every single friend also has those. So absolutely, way better than what's commonly available, for example, in the United States or Canada.
Which presents also the problem that you can go to Chinatown in San Francisco and pay them with your WeChat wallet and nobody knows, and you get your food eat, but this impacts the fiscal policy of the United States because guess what? You're not paying no tax, right?
Well, I don't know if you're paying tax in China or not, but yeah, I mean, there's going to be some fringe activities like that. But if it became a major thing, then all would happen is either California or the federal government, well, the federal government doesn't levy sales tax. California could pass a law saying no restaurants are allowed to accept payments in using a foreign currency payment app, and or if they do, all such transactions are liable to sales tax. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the restaurants in San Francisco that are accepting WeChat Pay are actually levying a sales tax, because if they're not, they're breaking the law and the government could come by and give them a problem.
I think we kept you up for like much longer than what you expected. But here in Toronto, as I said, we're like particularly proud that Ethereum came out of this land. I just want to tell you, I don't know how often you come here. We're by far one of the most sophisticated blockchain communities with Berlin, right? We live and breathe, even now in the virtual world, every week there's like at least a dozen of meetups, crypto meetups that you can go, that can hear everything. So thank you so very much. Unfortunately, we're not here to clap. I mean, if we start clapping from at home, it will be mostly us listening to ourselves. You guys just hear me in the microphone. It was just a pleasure, and I just hope that life and future we're allowed to have you physically over here visit us as soon as possible, and be able to have a physical talk and experience the audience. And there's very little words to thank you for your participation today. We're like honored, and that was a very interesting conversation and presentation that you did. And I can hear the chat also, people saying very similar comments. Thank you so much for being here.
I just want to thank you and Andreas Park and Christoph for arranging this, and all the great questions from Andreas and yourself and Braden and Victor and Chung and Amy and everyone else. Wonderful questions and very stimulating discussion. So I really enjoyed it. I hope you'd invite me back soon.
We have 1 hour to relax now so we can hear the presidential debate, if it happens. You never know. Maybe in the last an hour and a half we were over here, it was decided we're not going to have it. Thank you for being here today. And I hope to see you at least maybe as an audience when Facebook speaks. So now you will be the person doing nasty and candid questions to them.
I want to definitely come when the Bank of Canada is presenting, because I'm sure that's going to be really interesting.
These are wonderful people, as you said, and we're very, in this country, we should be feeling very lucky that we have like a very intelligent, not only central bank, but when it comes to blockchain and digital currencies, I would say one of the most advanced in their thinking and understanding of how those pieces move together in the world.
Andreas, I so agree. Deputy Governor Tim Lane is doing an amazing job at the Bank of Canada in this area.
Thank you for being here again, Darrell. Thank you, and all our love. Greetings from Canada, the home, from your home country, and we talk soon, and I'll send you the paper. Thank you so very much for being here today.